Hello, everyone. I think we are just in time. Welcome to our sixth session in the 2023-2024 Learning Exchange Series, Forest Plus Climate. I'm your host today, Daniel Ortega Pacheco. I'm the director of the Forest Carbon and Climate Program. I'm joined today by Defna Gadoth. She's providing us with support as our regular MS is feeling a bit down today. So we do hope that you can enjoy this session. As you can see in the lineup of the speaker, we have already covered very substantive topics in this domain. We're really looking forward to learning more about mass timber. As you can see in the screen, we need to thank our co-host, the Society of American Forester. I would like to acknowledge and thank you the support they have provided to the FCCP in the last few years, commonly known as SAF. Is a national scientific and educational organization representing forestry and related natural resource professionals across the United States. Founded in 1900s, the Society of American Foresters promotes science-based, sustainable management and stewardship of the nation's public and private forests. Today's presentation, we have the privilege and the honor to have with us Katie Fernholz. She is the president of Dovetail Partners and, of course, our former interim director of the FCCP and the director of the MassTimber at MSU, Sandra Lupien, will present the MassTimber, how to think about the carbon value proposition. We are sincerely thankful to Katie and Sandra for taking the time to speak with us today. Before we move into content, a couple housekeeping details to keep in mind. First, respect to question and answers. Please use the feature to submit your questions at the bottom of your Zoom screen, as is shown in the picture. And we will be happy to address them at the end of the presentations. And before we get started, it is important as well that you keep us informed of any of your future questions with respect to our work in the Forest Climate Program. The email address is shown in the screen. A recording of this session, along with a copy of the slides and any supplemental resources, will be posted to the Learning Exchange Series webpage that I just shared in the chat. And after we finalize the slides by our panelists today, we will be followed with a QA session. Next slide. Thank you. For attendees, which are qualified to receive CFE credits from the Society of American Foresters, the credits will be automatically applied if you register for the event with the email associated with your SFA account. Similarly, attendees are qualified to receive CEU credits from ISA. And please email us with your certificate ID to receive those credits. Without further ado and any longer introductions, let me welcome Katie again, and I will hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. And I am happy to be here. And Sandra, it is great to be doing this with you as well. So I think we're going to have fun over the next hour. So as you said, with no further ado, I'm going to jump into sharing this screen. And it's asking me, Daniel, for you to stop sharing maybe. But oh, let's see what happens. Good. There's always extra steps. Let's see. Please confirm if you're seeing my screen. Is that coming through? Good. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Good. Well, let's jump into this. We're talking about mass timber today and really the carbon value proposition. So I'm going to go through a few kind of basic things around the forest carbon cycle, kind of these multiple dimensions to that. Exploring the benefits of active management, engaging in our relationship with forests, and really people power. Yay, go people, go forests, yay. All right, let's start with forest carbon. So most of the time when we're talking about forest carbon, we're talking about this loop, the loop that happens in the forests with trees and photosynthesis, and trees absorbing carbon dioxide, letting go of that oxygen molecule, keeping the carbon, turning it into wood, and putting that wood into the trees, into the roots, into the soil. But we know that sometimes in the forest, there's wildfires or trees die, the forest is a living dynamic system. And so there's also the release emissions of carbon dioxide from the forest through different cycles. But this is the forest carbon cycle, and it's a wonderful, elegant, natural, robust, resilient system of cycling carbon. And wood, as a result of this system, is half carbon by weight, by dry weight. So, but we can also look at carbon and the forest carbon cycle in other ways. We can look at, oops, why does it not want me to advance? There's the right button. All right, so we can also look at our relationship with the forest and utilizing the gifts and the materials of the forest within our economy, within our built environment, within our communities, our businesses, our homes. So one of the first ways to think of that is removing wood from the forest, especially wood that potentially is at risk with insect and disease or wildfire, moving that wood, moving that stored carbon into our energy system, using renewable bioenergy from well-managed forests, from fuel reduction, restoration efforts, but moving material from the forest to change our energy system, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and move toward renewable bioenergy. But of course, we also know that comes with trade-offs around emissions, but there is a cycle there of moving carbon into the energy system and improving our energy footprint. Another way that we can engage with the forest and the forest carbon cycle is, again, moving wood from the forest into our built environment. Mass timber, yay, that's what we're here to talk about. So that can give us opportunities for long-term storage within the built environment. And of course, we can further improve our carbon footprint when we recover materials through recovery, demolition and development, recovery, deconstruction from our buildings. So oftentimes when people are talking about forest carbon cycles, they're just talking about that first loop, what happens in the forest. But we really can look at these layers of how the forest goes through our lives and gives us multiple strategies to have a better relationship with climate change and more mitigation strategies. And it's everything from strategies that allow us to reduce wildfire risk, ways that we engage in nurturing the forest with planting trees, the ways that we accept and value with gratitude the gifts of the forest and the materials that are sustainably provided, and wood products as a substitute for some of those higher impact products. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, the benefit of active management in our relationship with the forest. So forests are incredibly diverse. So these are just two little cartoons to give examples, but I just want to acknowledge that forests are so diverse, the patterns of disturbance, the ecology so diverse. So please don't be too limited by just a simple example here. But this is just looking at a simple example of an unmanaged forest versus a sustainably managed forest. And in this forest dynamic, we're talking about a forest that is at risk of wildfire over its time. Maybe it's a fire-dependent ecological type. Maybe it's a part of the landscape where wildfire risk is elevated. But this is just a simple scenario of a forest where wildfire risk is a consideration within management. So with unmanaged forests, fire, yes, it's natural. Trees naturally live and die and things happen in forests. But what can oftentimes happen with an unmanaged forest is these natural dynamics can be really boom and bust cycles. So rather than something, relatively steady or stable, we can end up with a forest that in the absence of management, in the absence of people caring for that forest, the trees grow up, they grow up thick, you get wildfire, fuel loading, and it just gets to a breaking point where you end up with a catastrophic fire. And then the forest is really devastated. You're starting kind of over from square one with regrowing the forest, so it's a really dramatic disruption in that ecology. Like I said, it can be natural, but it's not always sustainable for public safety, for wildfire risks, impacts to water quality. I mean, one of the worst things that happens after high impact wildfire, it rains and all of that ash goes into water systems. That's terrible for fish, terrible for municipal water supplies. So we have to live with wildfire, but these boom and bust cycles are very disruptive, and they really can create problems for plants, problems for the climate, and problems for people in terms, like I said, of public safety. So an alternative is really to engage with that forest, manage it, care for it in ways that meet our needs, but also can actually improve the stability and resiliency of that forest. So through management, through careful harvesting, selecting trees, planning for a diverse wildlife habitat, reducing fuel loads, we may still have fires in that forest, but they're going to be more moderated, less disruptive to the environment and to people. So and it can be a better carbon outcome, not that huge emissions of carbon dioxide in the very destructive wildfires, but something more manageable and sustainable over time. So it's just one of those things, thinking about our relationship with the forest and how that can have all kinds of co-benefits for people and communities, for wildlife, water quality, as well as for climate and carbon storage. So I just want to have a few more slides here because I want to bring this home to kind of a US context. And I think then, Sandra, you're going to bring it to a Michigan context. Go Michigan. But from a US context, so that's kind of the theory of forest carbon, kind of the theory of how we relate with the forest. But what does that really look like here within North America and within the US? So to understand this relationship with forests within this continent, first of all, this is a map of the ecological regions of North America, and each color, it represents a ecoregion that's distinct and defined by its characteristics, climate characteristics, as well as its dominant vegetation. And most of these, the dominant vegetation is forest, is some form of forest. So if you look at the eastern US, Texas to Maine, Florida to Minnesota, that big eastern temperate forest region, that whole area, east of the Mississippi, has the ecological temperature, moisture, climate conditions for growing trees. North of that light blue, the boreal forest through Canada, again, evergreen, spruce, and fir, the ecoregion that's dominated by forest. The dark green through the Rocky Mountains, another predominantly conifer evergreen forest region. Along the Pacific coast, that blue coastal, some of the biggest, oldest trees in the whole world, and that's another forest region. You have the desert region centered around Nevada, chaparral kind of region of Southern California, and of course the Great Plains of the Midwest. But like I said, that Texas to Maine, Florida to Minnesota, Rocky Mountains, boreal forest, there's a lot of this continent that has the ecological conditions, the right precipitation and temperatures and climate for growing trees. It's absolutely spectacular. And this is where we see those patterns in our landscape today. So this is where we have forests across. This is just showing the lower 48, but basically, and then you see the darkest counties have seen forest cover increase in recent decades. And so this pattern of where we have forests obviously mimics and is reflective of that ecological pattern, because ecology does determine where it's possible, feasible to have vibrant forests. The other thing that determines where we have forests are land use choices. So this is a slide of farming, and I'm sure you could see what happened there between those two slides. You can't have trees and a cornfield in the same spot at the same time. So we make these choices about how we use our land, and forests are the largest land classification in the United States. And we actually have twice as much forest and woodland as we do cropland. But when you put together cropland with grazing land and all those categories of agriculture, then they end up being pretty comparable amounts of land. But ecology determines where we have forests. Land use choices decide where we have forests. Private landowners, this is a map showing public and private lands, the lighter color being private lands and the darker color being public. So private landowners make decisions about how to use their land, and private landowners are influenced by markets. This is a map of where we have sawmills in this country. So we have this ecological capacity to grow forests. We have forests in those regions today. We have predominantly private landowners. Private landowners provide about 89 to 92% of our annual wood harvest in this country. And those landowners are responding to markets. And when those landowners grow trees, they're storing carbon. When they put wood into buildings, they're storing carbon. And it's part of the formula. So last thing I want to touch on, I said people power, and really how should we be thinking about the carbon value proposition? And I think the way that we think about the moment we're living in and the challenge of climate change is exactly the way to start. It is all about our mindset. And I've worked in forestry for over 25 years. And I know that people love nature, love trees, love forests. Also, they hold a lot of fears that we're going to screw it up, that we're going to make the mistakes of the past, we're going to exploit these resources. There's a lot of fear that we're going to get it wrong. And I think that's important to acknowledge, that there are times where we have exploited our forest resources and we haven't always gotten it right, but we need to lean into our relationship with forests. And I think our scarcity mindset, our fears around forests, or letting our fear of getting it wrong stop us from trying. No, we got to combat our fear with hope. So these are some of the things I think people hold on to that inhibit our relationship with forests. And I don't even like to read these out loud and put them into the universe. So just read these and just think about how they make you feel. And then on the next slide, I want to show you a different way to think about your relationship with forests. All right, let's try a different way of thinking about our relationship with forests. So read these and think about how this makes you feel, the possibilities. So I think this is the mindset we have to have. We have to understand the complexity and beauty of our forests, that forest carbon is only part of our relationship with the forest in terms of what trees are doing, but the way we bring wood into our lives and honor those materials is a big part of it. And forests, all living things belong together. We're part of the same system. And so I think this mindset is really important. And when you're part of a system and when you're in a relationship with that system, it's active. It's not passive. It's not negligent where you just leave it alone somewhere over there. You're in relationship with it. You spend time together, actively caring. And that's what we need to do with our forests. That's the climate call to action. So I'll leave it there. We'll have more questions. Sandra, the floor is yours.
All right, Katie, thank you so much. That was, as always, amazing. And just so everybody knows, I love listening to Katie speak about this topic. I've been fangirling Katie for several years now. So I'm very happy to be on this panel with Katie. And Katie, can I put you on the spot and just ask you a question before I go into mine, which
Please.
is, if we increased our use of mass timber and started using mass timber instead of steel or concrete in 50% of our buildings in the United States, how would that affect the stock of wood on forests? Would we have enough wood? What's the thinking on that? What's the science telling us on that?
Yeah, and there's published science on it. That's the good news. And dovetail, some of our reports on mass timber at our website explore that science and cite that. Bottom line, the projections around expanded use of mass timber, even some of the boldest projections still leave at least a 20% surplus of annual growth. So the data is all there. There's a couple factoids I'd give you. As a nation, we harvest about half of our net annual growth. After subtracting for mortality, wildfire, everything else, we only harvest about half of the annual increment of wood. There's about 1 trillion cubic feet of wood standing in America's forests. That is enough to get us almost to the moon if you stacked it all up, over 80% of the distance to the moon, or over 7.5 times around the equator. So the challenge to wrap our heads around how much we can do with wood. That's why to me, it's about the forest. It's about our energy systems, our built environment, consumer goods. All of those opportunities can connect us to the forest. But good question, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. And I knew you would say it better than I could, so I wanted to have that opportunity for people to hear that from you. So we've got a lot of wood in North America. We've got a lot of wood. And so what we're doing here at Michigan State University through our program MassTimber at MSU is really working to grow mass timber momentum for forests, for climate, for sustainability, and, as Katie said, for people. I'm going to go back to the beginning and talk about even what even is mass timber. I always like, in any audience I'm speaking to, I like to kind of level set. What is mass timber? When we talk about mass timber, we're using an umbrella term to refer to an array of very large engineered wood building construction materials. Think of these are dimensional lumber put together in various configurations to achieve different structural and decorative goals. And we shouldn't be thinking about mass timber necessarily in the same way we think about like wood stick framing for your house. We're thinking mass timber is comparable and has similar use cases to large steel I-beams or tilt-up concrete. So like these really large building construction materials, right? So think of mass timber like you think of steel or concrete. Big stuff. So you can see some pictures of it here. Types of mass timber. This is a picture of a building on our campus under construction a few years ago, and it contains 2 different types of mass timber: glue laminated timber, columns and beams. This is dimensional lumber, like 2x4s or 1x2s, put together in layers, in which each layer is flows in the same direction as the layer next to it, in the direction of the wood grain. There's some adhesive in there, and then this is pressed in a hydraulic press to create something that's really, really dense and really, really stiff, and can be used in these very large buildings in structural applications. You can also make cool arches out of glue laminated timber, so we're not just talking about 90-degree angles with mass timber. Cross-laminated timber is the type of mass timber that really caused the term mass timber to be coined and started emerging from Europe in a major way about 40 years ago, right? Like glue laminated timber, it's layers of dimensional lumber with adhesive, hydraulic press. But here, we're looking at the shape of panels, very large panels. And each layer of lumber is in the opposite direction of the one next to it. So that's why it's cross-laminated. And what that means is something really cool. It means that we have a big panel that's strong in more than one direction. So it can handle the force of gravity, and it can also create the lateral resistance for a building. And lateral resistance is a structural property that basically enables a building not to flop over if a big wind blows or if an earthquake happens. We have not been able to use wood in large buildings in this way until the emergence of this product. So this is very exciting because what it does is it allows us to displace the use of steel and concrete, which have a very high carbon footprint and are not renewable. It allows us to replace those materials with materials made from wood, a renewable resource, which Katie just explained, one that actually stores carbon in the built environment. So this is a very exciting thing. I always like to try to explain to people how I even got interested in mass timber because I'm not an architect. I don't have a forestry background. I don't have a construction background. I'm a public policy, communications, and stakeholder engagement person who has been very interested in putting my energies toward addressing climate change for over 20 years. So I worked in all these different types of climate, environment, and community development organizations in these functions that I just mentioned. And in 2016, I started this mid-career Master of Public Policy in California at UC Berkeley, where I thought, okay, I've been living in the Bay Area for a long time. I'm going to focus on sea level rise. I'm going to focus on urban heat effect. But then I went to the Sierra Nevada, and this is what the forests looked like in 2016, right? California was facing its worst drought ever. Bark beetles had infested the forest. Hundreds of millions of trees were dying. This is still happening. And I thought, wow, there are climate change reasons that this is happening. The drought is exacerbated by climate change. But if these trees and these forests that have way too much forest density per acre start burning at the rate that they'll burn if a big fire goes through here, we're going to lose so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that really bothered me. So my friend Sam and I first started a furniture company to make furniture out of these beetle kill pine trees. And we were finding that people really responded to this story. They liked that the wood was beautiful, that it was durable, and that it was available as a waste material in forests nearby where they lived. But, you know, even as we were selling furniture, we were like, also, this is not the best solution. The scale of this problem is enormous. What else can we make with this wood that really needs to be, you know, thin from the forest to achieve healthier, more resilient forests? And that's when we learned about mass timber. So we decided we wanted to try to pivot to becoming a mass timber manufacturer. We did a lot of business side research on this, realized that, hey, what we're trying to do using this low value wood is very difficult because this wood does not have existing markets. It's not in the supply chain. That means we need policy interventions to try to help address that. So I did my Master of Public Policy thesis on how could California remove the barriers to the manufacture and adoption of mass timber. And so I'm just saying this because as a person who has worked in the climate change space for a really, really long time at some very progressive organizations, for me, the mass timber, the way I came to it was all about the role that it can play in addressing climate change. And there are other benefits to mass timber. These fall into several buckets for construction, for jobs and economic development opportunities, and then, of course, the forest climate and sustainability, which I'm not going to talk about very much because Katie kind of did the job doing that. But in the construction side, as I mentioned, mass timber is a really high performance material. It's lighter weight and yet very strong. So lighter weight than steel or concrete, yet very, very strong. So it has this great strength to weight ratio, which means you might even use fewer materials in the foundation of your building, for example. And that's really good because those materials typically are still concrete and steel based. It's a prefabricated material, which means you can typically build the building faster. Once the materials arrive on site, the building can go up really quickly. It performs well in seismic testing. So for those of you who are in earthquake zones, that's great. And it is a highly fire resistant material because when fire occurs in a mass timber building, what happens is the exterior layers of the mass timber char, and they essentially perform a protective layer around the structural layers within. So it's like if you put a whole log in your campfire and try to burn it so you can make your s'mores at the end of the night. You're pretty grumpy. You're also cold because that fire has put itself out by charring the log, right? So this is what mass timber does. And in the case of a building, that's really good because your structure remains intact. From the perspective of jobs and the economy, people are very excited about mass timber, right? It can create, like, this value-added product can increase revenue for forest land owners, whether those are commercial or private family forests, or if those forests are on public land, which is important because public lands are always short on revenue to do forest health management, the type of management that Katie was mentioning earlier. So this can help provide revenue. It can help revitalize employment sectors in the forestry industry, in the timber industry. We know that those industries have been critical parts of the economy in many parts of the country throughout history. They have declined in recent decades. We can revitalize them and do it in a good way by applying the forest management practices that we have in North America and using that wood for mass timber. And we can create new kinds of jobs in mass timber manufacture and fabrication, and even new types of construction jobs that the carpenters unions across the country have already started training their workers to take on. I also like to talk about benefits of mass timber in terms of both architectural innovation, beautiful design. Architects love to work with this new material, but there's also something really cool about mass timber that benefits the people who occupy the buildings. And it's a concept called biophilia. And this also it's a scientific concept that has research behind it. This refers to the benefits of bringing nature indoors, the benefits to humans of bringing nature indoors. So that when you have materials like exposed wood in your home, in your office, in your school, you may report improved mental health and the sense of well-being. You may report greater productivity. These benefits are measurable. And so people who build buildings at institutions, like at schools, or real estate developers who create housing, are starting to choose mass timber because they know that's a benefit to the occupants of their buildings. And then finally, Katie talked about the stuff that happens on the forest side related to the benefits of a harvested wood products economy, including mass timber. This matters in the built environment because buildings and the construction industry account for 39% of global carbon dioxide emissions, right? This 28%, this blue piece of the pie, this is operational carbon. That's not what we're talking about here. We know that, you know, we're working on energy efficiency, we're working on electrifying to address that 28%. But this 11% here, the construction industry, has to do with the materials that we use to build buildings and the emissions associated with producing and sourcing and transporting those materials. And research is already showing that mass timber has a significantly lower carbon footprint and a significantly lower embodied carbon footprint. So that's already good. But then wood is the material that stores carbon in the building, right? 50% carbon stores carbon in the building for a really, really, really long time. So our program, MassTimber at MSU, is excited about all of these benefits, and, you know, is the reason that we've launched the program. So we're a collaboration inside the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources across the Department of Forestry, the School of Planning, Design, and Construction, and MSU Extension. And we are mobilizing all the things that our big land grant university does well, right? Education and research, but especially outreach and stakeholder engagement, and thinking about public policy to help grow mass timber construction and manufacture here in Michigan, but as well as in the Great Lakes region and beyond. Can we do that with significant partnership and funding from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and from the U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Program? So we've got some great partners, and we're really building a lot of momentum. And a lot of the reason that we've kind of been able to catalyze this momentum is that we've been able to leverage our new STEM teaching and learning facility on our campus, which is the state's first, one of the first and definitely the most prominent mass timber building in the state. We leverage this facility as a learning laboratory, primarily for the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that in a moment, but I wanted to give you a sense of the carbon storage ability of a building like this, right? So this building contains 3,000 cubic meters of mass timber. It's split roughly equally between the cross-laminated timber panels that I mentioned to you, and then the glue laminated timber columns and beams. And that stores at least 1,856 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And it's fun to be talking to this audience because I know that this audience is more focused on carbon and climate. And when I say 1,856 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, many of you are like, oh yeah, okay, I can get that. But most of us, like myself, need something a little bit more relatable. So that's like not driving the average car about 4.7 million miles or not burning at more than 2 million pounds of coal. So our one mass timber building is not saving the world. Our one mass timber building is making just a small dent in, offsetting some carbon emissions through storage. But if we're building more and more buildings like this, using more mass timber and less steel and concrete, you can start to see how our built environments can become carbon storage banks instead of carbon sources. And this is so exciting. So MassTimber at MSU, we really want more mass timber going into buildings in Michigan. And so in order to do that, we focus on outreach and engagement, really expanding the mass timber knowledge in our state, as well as trying to create a cohesive network or ecosystem involved in mass timber. And that's a multi-sector ecosystem, right? So I said we use our building as a learning laboratory. We've taken more than 2,300 people on tours of that building over the past 2.5 years, really helping them understand the benefits of mass timber. Most of those people are in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry and are approaching their first mass timber projects, right? They've got a client who's like, oh, I've heard about this mass timber. It seems really cool. Can you make me a mass timber building? And they're like, yes, we can. And then they come to us and they're like, how do you do this? So we try to help them really understand that. And that's having a real impact that I'll talk about in a moment. In addition to that, we're really working to expand our ability to provide technical assistance to both the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as well as to forest products manufacturers, et cetera, people who might want to get involved in making mass timber in our state, and urban planners and developers who might want to choose mass timber, all the different types of stakeholders. So we've launched what we're calling the Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice. This is a quarterly virtual community of practice for stakeholders in the Michigan mass timber ecosystem to be able to have access to experts, to ask them questions, but also to engage in peer learning, which I think is even more important. And then we take a group of people each year to the International Mass Timber Conference in Portland, Oregon. We were just there last week. We had about 50 people this year, a little bit less than we had last year, but this is an opportunity for people to cross-pollinate, to learn. And those people come back with new ideas and new partnerships that have resulted in actual new mass timber projects going up in our state. We also host a big event in December, the Michigan Mass Timber Update. In addition to all of that outreach and education, we're engaged in research initiatives. We're especially excited about this project. As I said, we're very interested in seeing mass timber manufacture and fabrication in the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan itself is interested in that. So we support the realization of that goal in a number of ways. Most importantly, we're conducting a Michigan mass timber supply chain analysis and a demand survey to really help prospective suppliers understand, if I want to make mass timber in Michigan, where am I getting my feedstock? What is it? What are the transportation contexts? How about workforce? And then who's going to buy it in the Great Lakes region? We're also piloting Michigan-sourced nail laminated timber in 2 projects in the Upper Peninsula. Nail laminated timber is a cool lower tech type of mass timber that you can make. You don't need a big factory to do this in. You don't use adhesives. You just need a space, like a warehouse, and a jig and some nail guns and some people and an engineer to say, put the nails here. And then these are just panels that you put together. So we're going to be doing local workforce training and development as part of this project. We're also developing curriculum. One of the things that we know is that architects, engineers, construction managers, and carpenters, builders, installers aren't learning about mass timber in their 2-year community college programs or in their 4-year university programs as a matter of routine. So what we're doing is developing curriculum modules that instructors, in architecture, construction management, all those disciplines can drop into their existing courses to expose their students to mass timber so that they do have some knowledge of that when they leave the workforce and approach companies that are growing mass timber portfolios. So really trying to provide the training and education that people need. And then one other piece of research that we're doing that I want to mention to you is the development by one of our faculty, Mojgan Najad, in her labs in the Department of Forestry, focused on making mass timber adhesives that are based on lignin. And most of you probably know that lignin is a waste material coming from forest product industry, but also agriculture. And she's using lignin instead of the fossil fuel bases that are typically used in these types of polyurethane adhesives. So the existing adhesives and coatings in mass timber now are polyurethane based. And that's not a terrible thing, but what she's doing is really trying to create a lignin-based adhesive that is biodegradable, fully sustainable, and way less expensive because it's made from a waste product. And it's being tested in a manufacturing facility right now and showing awesome adhesion and significantly lower costs. So that is very exciting. And what that does is it helps us think a little bit more about something Katie mentioned, which was like, when mass timber is done being in a building, this is from a carbon and climate perspective, right? How can we extend the carbon benefits of those materials by finding a new use for them? Well, if the adhesive in them is biodegradable, that offers us a lot more options than it does if there's a polyurethane adhesive in there. So just one more great way to make this even more sustainable. Just noting where mass timber is currently manufactured in North America, it's kind of interesting to think about that and wonder about that. But most manufacturers in the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast, right, using softwood species here, using Douglas fir, probably some SPF, spruce pine fir in the Pacific Northwest, and then in the Southeast using southern yellow pine. We see a gap here in the Midwest. We've got a nice manufacturer here in Canada that uses black spruce. That's pretty close to us here in Michigan. And one here near Chicago using southern yellow pine. But there's a lot of room to increase the domestic supply of mass timber for a variety of reasons, not for nothing, to reduce the transportation distance that finished products are traveling to get to buildings, right? So further reducing the carbon footprint of mass timber. And it's important that we do increase the supply because demand for mass timber is increasing really rapidly across the country. Between 2018 and 2023, we had a mass timber demand in the United States increased 4.5 times. That's really rapid demand. And we expect to see that demand continue to expand on a rapid trajectory over the coming years and decades. In Michigan, we're seeing significant, now I'm bringing it home to Michigan. In Michigan, we're seeing significant demand as well. We have more than 45 mass timber projects in our pipeline. And remember, our mass timber building opened on the MSU campus just in July of 2021. So this is a lot of new demand in a very short period of time. This is the status of those projects. We've got 8 that are complete, 4 that have broken ground, and 12 that are under construction, and then 21 that are in planning and design. And kind of, this is anecdotal. I'm counting this anecdotally based on the projects that come to me. I think there's probably more that I don't know about. And then the level of certainty here is based on the conversations that I have with these project developers, right? 27 of them are certainly happening. There's 6 that I would consider very probable right now, and 12 that are still exploratory, either because they're in early phases or maybe project teams just need a little bit of help figuring out how to make mass timber pencil. And now I just want to move a little bit into talking about policy, because that's my happy place. And this category here, the probable and exploratory, are really the reasons that I argue that mass timber does need supportive policies right now. Like any new green technology in the United States, you know, the way that we help it become mainstream, whether it's solar or other types of renewable energy, whether it's electric cars, there are always supportive policies and incentives to help it move from kind of niche and early adoption into the mainstream. So, right, everybody's seen this before, the Valley of Death. This is the kind of metaphor for how new technology innovations develop and either go mainstream or don't go mainstream, right? So right now, there's been a lot of academic research and government-funded activities, and that's led to some early adoption in the United States. And as you just saw, this demand is starting to grow. but mass timber still faces a little bit of a green premium. Developers who want to use it might find that their project might cost more. Sometimes it's because of the materials. Sometimes it's because some of the what's called pre-construction processes. That's all the planning and design and development that takes place before you actually start building the building. Those processes tend to take a little bit longer and require more collaboration because mass timber is prefabricated. So that might take a little bit longer, and that creates more risk to them, right? They invest more money before they get a shovel in the ground. So in order to kind of help them get over this hump and to help mass timber move in the mainstream, we do need some supportive policies right now to help address that green premium. So things like making sure to get mass timber into state and local climate and sustainability planning documents, like making sure all of our building codes in each state are updated to at least the 2021 version of the International Building Code, which created 3 new types of mass timber buildings. Making sure that states are thinking about including mass timber in their procurement policies, right? Making sure building standards and zoning codes have ways to support mass timber, allowing you to build taller or build larger, or even build by right without things like special use permits if you're using mass timber, removing red tape for mass timber. It's possible to use a tax policy like tax increment financing, which is tied to brownfields, or tax rebates or abatements. And also grants, different types of grant programs. We've seen lots of federal grants that states administer rolling out for solar. Let's start doing that for mass timber, right? In Michigan, we're having some success in the policy space, very early stages, but still good stuff. So our Michigan Healthy Climate Plan, which is our state's roadmap to achieving net zero carbon by 2050, mentions mass timber 3 times as a tool in the state's toolkit to achieving that goal. And our Lansing, the city of Lansing, that's our capital city, our sustainability action plan has some similar language calling out mass timber as a good tool. A school district, Ann Arbor, the Ann Arbor Public School District is specifying for mass timber. So it has a procurement policy. It says, hey, we've got all this bond money to do new school building and renovations over the next 30 years. When they put out a request for proposals, they say, we want you to be designing with mass timber. We want you to have mass timber skills and experience. That's very powerful. We have 6 schools in Michigan in that district right now that are under design with mass timber. We are in the process of getting the 2021 International Building Code adopted into our Michigan Building Code. So we'll have access to those 3 new mass timber building types. We're looking at a zoning ordinance in one of our cities to make it easier to build with mass timber, and have started at the state level talking about all different types of incentives and credits and grants. These are very early, like just seeds planted conversations, but the types of things that can really help make a difference in advancing mass timber here in our state. All right, I'm almost there. So some conclusions that I just wanted to mention. Wood is the building material that causes us to plant trees and grow forests. You might have heard that message somewhere really recently. I think that's right. You know, wood does that. It helps us keep forests as forests. We don't want to convert forests to other uses when we know that we have economic value associated with them, in addition to all of the other incredible critical benefits that mass timber offers to water quality, air quality, wildlife, recreation, all the things. But these economic values are important too. Wood building materials uniquely store carbon, remember, and it also allows us to substitute for other more carbon intensive materials. Mass timber demand and manufacture are growing across the United States. They're going to grow more. And, you know, we want to make sure that people understand why this matters and why this is important. We do need supportive policies to help demand for those things grow faster. And finally, we do need to continue to regularly revisit our forest management practices and our forestry practices to make sure that we're doing right by the forest, that we're doing it well, that we're managing for health, resilience, and sustainability, as well as for the products that we need. So all of these things are true. Those are my conclusions. And I think Katie and I are delighted to hear some questions from this group now.